This is the 93rd House, which was elected when President Richard Nixon was reelected. Let's concentrate only on the x-axis here. You don't need to pay attention to the y. I'm only using this chart because it allows me to spread out. And you can see the individual marks, score marks for Republicans and Democrats. So what matters is that score on the left from minus, which would be very liberal, -1, to +1, which would be very conservative. So don't worry about the black lines either. But what the key point to pick up from this is there's a substantial overlap between the two parties. You can see how many R's and D's are mixed together here in this Congress that sat from 1973 to 1975. And so that's the very first point to make about this, is that you have a lot of mixing. This, of course, was the time when George Wallace claimed that there wasn't a dime's worth of difference between the parties. Well, there was a difference. You can see it there. We can also measure it by taking the difference of the average scores for the two parties. And that difference turns out to be 0.55. This is an index of polarization between the parties. In the next figure, I'm going to turn the clock forward to the Congress elected in 2003. Now you can see the obvious point is that the parties have pulled apart. In this figure, there is only one R with roughly the same score as one D. Otherwise, there is no mixing. In fact, and what that means is the crossover votes, people crossing the aisle on roll call votes, have diminished as a practical matter. The R with the lowest score, that is the most liberal, was Jim Leach of Iowa, who was defeated in the 2006 election and is now a member of the Obama administration. And the D was Ralph Hall of Texas, who has since switched parties. The difference between the average scores of the two parties, the index of polarization, has grown to a bit more than 0.9. Remember that in 1973 it was 0.55. For 2007, there was no mixing at all in either the House or the Senate. The two parties had pulled completely apart. As a curiosity, and perhaps a demonstration of the validity of this method, it's worth noting that according to the scores for the last Congress, the 5 leftmost Republican senators in the 110th Congress were, from left to right, Olympia Snowe, Susan Collins, Gordon Smith, Norm Coleman, and Arlen Specter. Smith and Coleman were defeated in the November 2008 election. Snowe, Collins, and Specter were the Republicans who joined the Democrats to get the needed 60 votes to pass President Barack Obama's stimulus bill, and Specter has now switched parties. The next figure shows, skip that. The next figure shows the index of polarization from 1879, which is roughly the time of the formation of the modern two parties, till today. And you can see that the level of polarization today in both houses is higher than it was in the late 19th century. Polarization began to decline at the beginning of the 20th century and continued declining until hitting lows in the 1930s. It remained at low levels until the early 1970s, when it started to rise. From the late 19th century to the mid-70s, the Republican score drifted downward, that is, toward the political left on the first dimension, and the Democratic score drifted to the right, as they drifted to the right. The key shift among the Democrats, however, was among the Southern Democrats. They were to the left of the Northern Democrats on that first dimension, that one about economics, at the beginning of the 20th century. But they abandoned economic populism during this period and became more economically conservative. The shift stopped only when Democrats started being replaced by Republicans in the South, and remaining Southern Democrats started looking more like Northern Democrats. From the mid-1970s until today, the Republican first dimension score rose from 0.25 to 0.55 in the House, and the Democratic score went from -0.3 to -0.4, bringing the polarization index to 0.95. With the end of the debates over, I'm going to take that off for now. Whoop. No, I'm not. With the end of the debates over civil rights, voting in Congress has become almost totally dominated by the first dimension. Voting on other issues is now aligned with this economic dimension. This means that voting on lifestyle issues like gay rights, religion in the schools, immigration, crime and punishment, war and peace, and so forth, are all connected to the large historical American issue over the role of the government in the economy. This alignment has strengthened as polarization has increased. It's not clear to me at all why political positions on all these issues should be aligned. What underlying philosophy ties them together? I understand the underlying philosophy regarding the government's role in the economy. That is a coherent set of ideas on both sides. But I don't understand how it connects, for example, to abortion or to religion in the schools. Why should I be able to predict with confidence that someone who wants to expand government-provided health care will also be in favor of rehabilitation as opposed to punishment of criminals, or of negotiating with Iran over its nuclear program rather than threatening a military strike? Or why should I be able to predict the opposite? But I can. Won't be right all the time, but I'll make a lot of money on bets. Some observers have attributed this alignment of disconnected issues to tribal behavior. Each tribe has developed its own creed, and it's the opposite of the other creed. There are the believers, and then there are the others. As Senator Lindsey Graham put it, you are on one team versus the other, and never shall the twain meet. If it's a Democratic idea, I have to be against it because it came from a Democrat, and vice versa. When he left Congress, Richard Gebhardt put it this way: you are either in the blue team or the red team, and you never wander off. I never thought about it that much when I came, but it was very different then. People wandered off their side and voted in committee or on the floor with the other side. There was this understanding that we were there to solve problems. So that's polarization. It seems to have started in the early 1970s and reached the highest level in history now, which we're all now noticing every day. But why? There are two reasons, based on my reading of the literature. One is the geographic sorting of voters. Over time, communities and regions of the country have become more ideologically homogeneous. Thus, constituencies in congressional districts and states have been changing their political outlooks. Some House or Senate members, whose views mostly do not change over time, get out of step with their constituents' views. When these members lose a re-election fight or retire, they tend to be replaced by someone whose views are more in step with those of their constituents. Because of the electoral strength of incumbents, this process takes a long time because retirements are the preponderant mode of change. For example, in Oklahoma, when the somewhat conservative Democratic Senator David Boren retired, he was succeeded by the more conservative Republican Senator Jim Inhofe. Occasionally, members switch parties, like Representative Hall or Senator Specter. Sometimes they lose a primary fight or an election, like Congressman Leach. These constituency effects have been growing since the mid-70s. In my paper, I present solid statistical evidence that demography, race, ethnicity, education, and income is a big part of this story, this geographic story. But it's probably more than demography alone. In The Big Sort, Bill Bishop and Robert Cushing produced statistical evidence to support their argument that migration is producing communities that are increasingly homogeneous in terms not only of education, race, income, but also way of life. As people choose new communities, they seek out places with folks like them. This doesn't mean that we just mean we get neighbors with roughly comparable incomes. People also move into communities that offer things they like, such as bike paths, high-end coffee shops, good hunting, gun shops, golf courses, or a particular church denomination.